welcome to the afternoon session of TechNode's Emerge conference. Today we have with us three wonderful panelists. First of all, Professor Michael Sung. Michael is the co-director and co-founder of the Fanhai FinTech Research Center at Fudan University. He's also the chairman of Carbon Blue Innovations. We're very lucky to have him here. Harriet Tao. Harriet is the co-founder and CEO of Bianjie. It's the company behind Iris Network, a blockchain protocol. And she's also on the board of directors of Tendermint, which is another blockchain protocol based in the US, if I'm correct. And finally, Matthew Graham. Matthew is the CEO of Sino Global Capital, a Beijing-based blockchain-focused investment firm. And where are my notes? They're here. And I'm Elisa Gritzi. I'm a reporter at TechNode. I cover blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and fintech. And today we've been talking a lot about industries that have been negatively affected by US-China tensions, by the coronavirus pandemic. But blockchain, to me, as someone who's covering it, stands out as one area where we're still seeing a lot of cross-border collaboration. And it's also an area in which China has hit the gas pedal, so to speak, in the last year. Even before 2019, China was at least a center of gravity in global blockchain supply chains and innovation. And so we asked today if China is going to be the world's blockchain superpower, or as I like to say, will blockchain be China's thing in the future? And so, thank you everyone for joining us. So before we start looking ahead, let's see where we're at right now, and I will address this question to everyone. So where do you think we are right now in terms of blockchain innovation in China in comparison to the world?
I'll take a stab at that. I think overall, we've had this term blockchain for about a decade now, right? And people who have been proselytizing the industry and the disruptive impact of blockchain have been doing so for quite a few years, but we haven't actually seen real institutional enterprise adoption happen yet. And I think right now, in general, this is not just in China, but worldwide, we are reaching rapidly this inflection point. We have technologies maturing. The TPS rates, analogous to the baud rates of the first internet revolution, are getting to the point where they can support commercial grade, and trusted, secure interaction. We have regulation coming in around the world, and I think that traction point is just around the corner. Now, who or what industry is going to really kick it off? I actually firmly believe that China is in the driver's seat of this because of the systemic advantages that blockchain can provide, right? So if you're looking at China, Xi Jinping has announced in November that at the 4th plenary sessions that blockchain was a national strategy, right? And the reason he's doing this is because around that time last year, he was promoting this idea of modernizing governance, okay? If you read into that sort of cryptic phrase, you will understand that it means using technology to better supervise and run the country in a technological fashion. And so blockchain actually becomes this infrastructure of infrastructures to allow that to happen, right? Because right now you have Ant Financial Chain here and Baidu Super Chain there, and everybody has their own blockchain solution because it's been widely supported on the mainland. But these solutions do not talk to each other, right? And so if you want to actually do the big data thing, you want to do the AI thing and aggregate the data and do useful inference on top, vertically integrated into cloud computing, you don't have that capability yet. So then, therefore, blockchain becomes this unifying backbone infrastructure that allows heterogeneous IT systems to communicate with each other, right? And that is absolutely necessary for the sort of blockchainized internet, next generation internet to really thrive. Is because if in the original internet, in the beginning you have these siloed walled gardens too, right? They don't talk to each other because back then enterprise, didn't trust the internet. It was only after a decentralized and you had this interconnection and you have this a huge variety of innovation of cross-chain, cross-ecosystem activity, and you lower the bar of cost so that it doesn't cost $500,000 US dollars in sort of data center costs and engineering costs to do stuff, that's when it's going to explode. And I think that's basically what's happening now. And it's going to be driven by China because China can do the China thing, which is basically mandate essentially the entire country, the city governments now post-COVID, who are all trying to digitize. They're flush in stimulus money for what we call new infrastructure technologies. And blockchain is one of these. And now it's being wholesale deployed across the country in initiatives like the Blockchain-Based Service Network, the BSN. And so I think China really is in a leadership position to catalyze global enterprise adoption for the whole world. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. I think that answers our whole panel, really. That was a very comprehensive response. So I'd just like to dig in a little bit more into what you said about government support, and I would like to pass this question to Harriet. Harriet's company does work with the government in different capacities. So I want to ask you, what kind of support have you received and how is it working with the government?
Yeah, actually, I would like to echo what Michael just shared. I think for the blockchain, where are we today, and how China is doing in this global ecosystem? I believe China is really playing a more important role in this global picture. The reason is blockchain technology today, it is still in its early stage for application. Although we have quite mature foundations to address the issues such as the high performance, interoperability, but to get it into real business adoption, that really requires big effort, and usually it's very costly. So besides of VC and government support, that really helps to accelerate the adoption of the blockchain technology. And I would like to give one example. For example, my team, we started to work on Cosmos, which is interchain protocol, which is TCP IP type of interchain protocol to support reliable message transfer between blockchains. And so we work on the public blockchain side, and 2 years ago, we also found this interoperability is very important for enterprise. And for the very early stage, technology exploration usually will involve high risk. And we are very lucky to get the funding support from Nanjing Digital FinTech Research Institute. So besides of the funding support, I think most importantly, it also helped us to get connected with real business cases, such like the banks and also the supply chain management companies. So I think the business case and use scenarios, those are extremely important to verify those technology and also help to really polish and improve those technology.
Mm-hmm. I see. So are there any specific examples of blockchain adoption by local or central governments that come to mind? Maybe Matthew, you want to take this one?
Sure. So I think it's quite interesting that we're really at a different point in the adoption cycle in China versus other areas, versus the United States, for example. So China is really ahead of the curve in terms of government adoption and in terms of enterprise adoption. In the United States, for example, there was a wave of interest in enterprise blockchain applications maybe 2 to 3 years ago, but it's really cooled off considerably since then, as there was a lot of disappointment in the successful practical applications. Whereas in China, where as has previously been mentioned, we're really seeing the anointment of blockchain technology as something strategic in the same sense as 5G or AI. So I think what we're likely to see is a repeat of history for other technologies that have been anointed in the same way, such as previously we saw with electric car technology, with solar and things like that. We're likely to see both in the enterprise space and in the government space a huge, in fact, seeing already a huge influx of investment, frequently overinvestment. But what we're likely to see emerge out of that long term is some really innovative things. In terms of specific government applications and things like that, it does tend to be still very specific functional things, but I think that's really reflective of the fact that we're early in the pilot stage phase of many of these initiatives.
I want to maybe follow on and add, I think a key issue when we're talking about adoption is in fact interoperability. And I'll use a couple of examples. I think blockchain is very good at what we call multi-party coordination applications, right? When you have a bunch of stakeholders and they all have information of various transparencies and they need to coordinate something. So things like in the financial sector, clearing and settlement, right, of securities across different custodians and the exchange and things like that. That's a very prototypical case where blockchain can add a lot of efficiencies. Or in things like trade facilitation, trade finance, supply chain management, where you have a lot of stakeholders and you need to coordinate across the thing. Now, in these applications, one big issue is who owns the blockchain, right? You have companies like HSBC, they have a very nice trade finance platform, but unless both the seller and the buyer are on this platform and are customers at HSBC, it doesn't work, right? And so in typical cross-border trade internationally, one side is outside of that ecosystem, and therefore you don't get the traction and scale. And certainly the other banks probably don't want to jump onto HSBC's platform because of competitive reasons, right? So interoperability becomes the enabling thing that can allow all these systems to communicate with standards, which is now happening now. And with that, you're going to see a lot of more enterprise adoption happen. So I believe interoperability is actually a major key to enable that. And that is the next phase of the development of this blockchain ecosystem, right? In the first phase, it was mostly everybody wanted to be the one and only chain, right? Be the next Ethereum and this kind of thing. And now it's going to be balkanized into lots of many different chains with different specialties and advantages and strengths and weaknesses. And now we have the rise of the Polkadots, the Cosmos, the BSNs of the world, who are providing this interoperability layer. And when that actually becomes mature, and digital assets that on top can now be swapped from inter-blockchain to inter-blockchain, things like this, that's going to drive a lot of enterprise adoption.
So can you really break down the interoperability problem for me? So explain, if I'm a company and I want to put my company on the blockchain, anything from my HR to my supply chain, how does interoperability figure into that, and why is it so important?
So the interoperability is so important. I think it's not only just limited in trying to collaborate, enable the collaboration among one enterprise, like at least you just gave the example, like the HR and also the supply chain division. The interoperability, for them, is really for all these entities. They can exchange information, exchange value in a trustworthy way. Let us actually look beside of this within the enterprise, and the interoperability actually is even play a big role for the multi-enterprise collaboration, and even for the national wise, big level of collaboration. And I would like to give one example. I'm not so sure if you all notice one of the effort which is led by the China Securities Regulatory Commission, CSRC, the blockchain led by CSRC, that actually has two layers. And on the top layer, that is a central regulatory blockchain. And then on the second layer, that is really the blockchain for each regional markets. And using these two layers, it will allow like the independency and also flexibility and also the openness of all these different entities. Like the regional markets, they have a lot of flexibility to design the system to address their business needs. But the central regulatory network using the interoperability will be able to really conduct the supervision and also provide this service. So that is also another example for the interoperability, the value it can deliver.
And yeah, we've seen a lot of government initiatives, like in Beijing, they want to use blockchain to connect ports with customs, with supply chains, and we'll see where it goes. Right now, it's just a plan. But within that figures very well the blockchain services network. And I want to ask Michael first to tell us what it is, and then I would like Matthew to follow up by telling us why is it important and why is it so hyped.
Sure. So the blockchain-based service network was officially launched April 25th of this past year. So it's been in operation for about 6 months or so. And in that time, I believe it's credibly grown into one of the largest, if not the largest, and certainly the fastest growing enterprise blockchain ecosystems in the world because of the China adoption, right? The four founding partners are the State Information Center, which is the IT think tank associated with the National Development Reform Commission. So there's quite a bit of support from the NDRC. China Mobile, the largest IT company in China. China UnionPay, the largest payments company in the world. And a fourth company called Red Day Technology, which in many ways is the mastermind creating the architecture and deploying and maintaining this entire network, right? And basically, in the short time that it's been in existence, it's basically taken over as a lead in terms of the basic infrastructure for smart cities in the country. So there's dozen cities now deploying, notably in Hainan, in Xiong'an, which is the new high-tech city that's coming up. Very strong reference cases across the country. Again, this is coming at a time post-COVID, where the government has recently announced 750 billion renminbi in stimulus money specifically for new infrastructure and to create smart cities infrastructure. And so BSN has now come in as essentially the baseline infrastructure for this. And then internationally, it's going to form the backbone of the digital Silk Road, right? BSN is meant to be interoperable as a global interoperability network, not just for China. And China is mostly these permission chains, and BSN is already integrated with most of those. But also, importantly, it's integrating with all the public permissionless blockchains like the Ethereums and Tezoses of the world internationally, and creating a bridge for interoperability internationally into the China ecosystem. That's very, very key, because what the BSN can do now is they have something called the open permission network, which allows a permissionless blockchain to form a version of it with white label nodes and to detokenize the gas fees such that it can interoperate and be compliant to mainland activity. So it's a huge bridge for the international scene to connect into China as well. So in the 6 months, there's over 120 city nodes across China, and then on top of that, there's a lot of development happening with these smart cities and cross-border payments and all sorts of applications that sit on top. So I think that's going to catalyze, again, a lot of global enterprise adoption, because internationally, China is usually the largest or top 2 trade partner for most of the world, actually, right? And if post-COVID, these countries are struggling to digitize and to connect and to trade and to reduce barriers to friction in that trade, and the Chinese partner comes in with that interoperability, is going to push that adoption worldwide. So we're going to see a major push catalyzed by China. The same way that, say, the DCEP, the digital currency, has catalyzed all the central banks around the world to also consider their own CBDC.
Matthew, do you have anything to follow up with in terms of the BSN's international ambitions?
So BSN is a pretty interesting initiative to us. There's not really a Western analog in blockchain, but I think of it as kind of like a China-centric AWS for blockchain. Fully understood, there are international nodes as well, but you could start from that framing. And then to the extent that it can enable low-cost, rapid development of blockchain dApps, blockchain distributed apps, that's something that could be quite valuable, especially in mainland China, if that could allow for easier interaction with international blockchain technologies in a way that is regulated and compliant, then that could be immensely valuable. Obviously, it does have international nodes as well. It's kind of bifurcated into two parts because of regulations.
Matthew, sorry, I think you just need to hold it closer.
Obviously, for rules and regulations, it's bifurcated into two parts. So the international nodes that are able to use technologies like Polkadot in a full way, I think it's an open question to what extent people will be comfortable using BSN for that. But certainly in terms of the mainland China aspect, it's a super compelling initiative and a great example, along with the central bank digital currency, of how China is at the forefront in pushing government-backed adoption and enterprise adoption of blockchain technologies.
Okay, but for all the things that China is doing, there's some things that China is not doing. And one of them that perhaps stands out in the blockchain industry is initial coin offerings, which have been an engine for a certain kind of growth, for sure, across the world. So do you think, guys, that this prohibition has actually helped the blockchain industry, and what kind of direction has it steered it towards?
So I think this is a very interesting point, okay? It is certainly true that China does not support unregulated ICO activity. It's been pretty down against, the spread of Bitcoin use and that kind of thing. And certainly we have all the sensational news of Binance getting kicked out of the country and that kind of thing. But I do want to make a very clear point, okay, which is that China does not like the unregulated stuff and is essentially, cleaning that up, right? But that does not mean that China is against digital assets of the regulated form, right? And I think that is a common misconception in the West. Everybody, if you look at a regulatory heat map, right, China's the one in red as the against crypto thing, right? I sit in a unique position at Fudan University running this FinTech Research Center. We are working on the first asset-backed securitization for tokenization projects all over the place, working with the governments, giving the best policy recommendations. And I could say that China will also lead the world in regulated digital assets, and that time frame is just in the next year and change, right? First with the upcoming commercialized release of the digital currency. And when that happens and that's set, the first regulated STOs and tokenization are being mass experimented by all the top institutions, many of the top banks, certainly other institutions. And when that regulated form comes out, it will be also released onto the wild. Also, by the way, conveniently on the fintech infrastructure that will be built on blockchain initiatives like the BSN. And that will be like a flip of the switch. It will happen very, very fast. And this is not like a 5-year time horizon. This is like a sub 2-year time horizon. So I think it is actually a very, very exciting time. again, for the global crypto scene, because when China does this at this scale and drives this massive adoption in an institutional grade way, that's going to have ripple effects to the global industry.
What about the rest of you guys? What's your take on ICOs or lack thereof?
So I used to be a developer, and currently, like, I'm leading a technology team provides a blockchain service. And so I think, like, over the years, I feel blockchain, as I mentioned, is still a fast developing technology. It's not so mature yet. So it is really not meant for unqualified investor to really working on the initial offering, because that is really too risky. So that's why, like, I think there is a reason for banning the ICO. But one thing I would like to emphasize is in China, although like tokens are not for speculation, ICO is not allowed, but the open technology, the public blockchain, like all this effort is highly supported in the China. For example, like my team, like we're participating in the public blockchain development, and also like we are going to the universities, we are invited to the universities to introduce, say, like the Cosmos, the Tendermint consensus engine, and we are helping the students to really doing the labs. And so as long as like you are using the tokens really to construct the network to build up its value, is highly supported.
I would view it in this way. There are two third rails. There are two things you can't touch in China with respect to the blockchain industry. So the first third rail is going from fiat currency, going from renminbi into digital assets. And then the second third rail is any kind of speculative retail frenzy. For the most part, in our view, China has taken a fairly prudent approach and pragmatic approach, versus in contrast, I think the American regulatory approach has been quite heavy-handed. But really, it comes down to those two key items: that fiat to crypto is very sensitive, and any kind of speculative frenzy is going to be very frowned upon. I would view it in that way.
You mentioned before we were preparing, Matthew, that I wanted to ask you about the investment trends in China, and you mentioned that there's perhaps overinvestment or perhaps misallocation. Could you give us a map of that?
Sure. So I think there is misallocation and probably overinvestment in China blockchain. I think you can separate that into two categories. So the first category is misallocated investment in tokens, and I think both categories, by the way, are very related to the fact that it's still early days for blockchain just in general. But an example of the retail misallocation would be Filecoin, I think, where we have a very untested technology related to decentralized storage, and we have just a tremendous speculation that grew up around that. And it led to overinvestment in various mining machines, especially some of which even were scams, things like that. I think there's a lot of those types of misallocated investment on the retail side. Filecoin is a great example, but not limited to that, of course. And then the second kind of overinvestment is based on the fact that it is a technology that's being extremely supported from the national government. And so this is just something that we see again and again, that when any kind of technology is anointed in that way, there's a lot of innovation that comes out of it, but there's also a lot of weird games with subsidies, and there's overinvestment. This is just a pattern that we see again and again. I used the example earlier of solar electric cars, things like that. So there is overinvestment for sure, 100%, and it falls into those two categories: retail froth, and due to the top-down nature of the government-supported strategic technologies.
Retail froth, I love that phrase. That's really good. So maybe we should dig into that, Harriet. You just mentioned public chains, and it's generally considered to be true that public chains need to perhaps stay in the shadows or under the radar in China, that it's not a beloved technology and that China prefers consortium chains. But it sounds like you have had a different experience, so can you tell us about that?
So Elisa, your question is?
Can you just tell us about your experience developing a public chain in China? So, and also maybe explain the difference between public and consortium chains.
Oh, yes. So for the public blockchain side, like in China, I think like as long as your effort is focusing on the technology development, for example, like we are getting the grant support from the Cosmos Foundation, even from like 2017, and our team, Bianjie, is one of the two open source development team for Cosmos, like the earliest two. The other one is Tendermint, which is the founding team of the Cosmos. So in China, like all these activities highly supported, and I still remember even in 2017, and we are in Zhangjiang. Zhangjiang is a part of Shanghai, focused on the high tech. The Zhangjiang government, they given us the good support and policy, and even very open to invite the Cosmos team to give the technical seminars using the Zhangjiang government's facility. So all this in the China, the public blockchain development, I just want to repeat that once more. It is very, very supportive, as long as it's on the technology side. And but I also I have a lot of discussion with my global blockchain community friends, and so I want to get them to understand actually consortium blockchain also has great value. I know for a lot of my public blockchain friends, they would say, right now, consortium blockchain still exists is because the performance of public blockchain is not that great yet, and they believe in one day, in future one day, public blockchain will be taking off. But I have different opinion. I think besides of performance, and permission chain, public, which is consortium blockchain, and the public chain, they are really addressing different business needs. And consortium blockchain, they are, besides of the performance, more importantly, also they enhance the governance support as well as the security support. Usually that is very needed in the enterprise environment. So just imagine, if you have your medical data, for the hospital and also the healthcare research institute, they need to exchange those data. Then for those data, we just cannot get it on through the public blockchain, and it will really make great sense using a permissioned blockchain. So even in future, I believe both public chain, permissioned chain, they will coexist. So they are both have great value, really addressing the business needs from the different aspects.
Just want to point out that for those performance concerns, you can switch to our portfolio company Solana, which is faster than Ethereum by a factor of 10,000x, and each transaction only pennies.
Yes, actually, we are good friends to Solana team. I really like the consensus design. They have the timestamped design. Okay. That is really cool.
Michael, do you have anything to say on the public consortium divide and how the two are treated in China?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Harriet's point of view, which is basically, if we look further out into the development of the blockchainized world, it's going to be a hybrid mix. There's certainly technical and other sort of even business model reasons why you want a consortium chain versus a public blockchain, but certainly they're going to coexist. And again, the glue logic between the two, the interoperability, becomes the enabling thing to allow innovation and use cases that have strengths on one blockchain system to then to transfer value and those capabilities to another. And so the key thing really is really the unifying set of tools that can be put on top to really lower the bar for developers to take advantage. So for example, I'll use an example, like I think these days one of the highest performing mega unicorn companies is Shopify, right? And why? Is because with a few clicks of a button, then you can actually go and create your own digital commerce portal and take part in the digital economy. Even a retail person or a small SME can do that, right? 20 years ago, you needed a whole engineering team, you need a budget of a couple $1 million, you needed to create your own data centers. That's not going to allow people to jump on and take advantage of that digital economy and innovation, right? So likewise, it's these tool sets, it's the user experience, it's the unifying frameworks, it's the cross-border portability in kind of abstracting away the technology, but just keeping the business use cases, which is going to drive that. And I think we are approaching that sort of situation, again, with technologies and infrastructure platforms such as the BSN to allow that to happen.
Okay, guys, so I think we're running low on time. So I'm going to ask you for some closing remarks and perhaps a yes or no question if you think that China is going to become the world's blockchain superpower, or a second question is it already the world's blockchain superpower? And then I'm going to open the floor to questions from the audience, maybe 5 minutes for questions. So give us your closing remarks. Perhaps Matthew, you want to start?
So I would phrase it as China already is a leader in most facets of blockchain. We think that they are poised to be the leader in many aspects, but probably with the exception being token-based projects, developing homegrown, world-class token-based projects, for many reasons lagging a little bit behind, but in all other areas either already a or the world leader. And by the way, of course, the token-based development, a lot of that has to do with local law. So I would kind of phrase it in that way. And then I think the second thing to keep in mind is that this is still early days. The last time there was a digital technology that was this transformational was probably the internet. And so if you were to make an analogy with internet in where I'm from, the United States, this is probably 1993. Would be the analogy. This is very early days. This is not even AOL, which would mean the start of mass adoption. This is more like CompuServe, Prodigy, BBS, IRC. Very, very early days, but it's a technology that's going to be enormously influential, and China for sure will be will be front and center.
Actually, I quite agree with Matthew's viewpoint, and it has already been 11 years for blockchain into developments, and I think for the first 10 years, the crypto technologies in the West has been contributed greatly to the progress of the blockchain technology. And starting from last year, because of the great adoption and also the rich business case and also the talents, I think China is playing a more and more important role in this global ecosystem. But this is really not like a winner-takes-all scenario. For blockchain, it is a trust machine to enable collaboration. So I feel like for the blockchain, the value is really for multi-parties, through this trust machine to work together. And so I definitely believe the contribution from the China talents, the work in the enterprise, the work in in the BSN, in the hybrid infrastructure, that can also greatly contribute back to the global progress of the blockchain.
I have to just re-emphasize, actually Harriet took the words out of my mouth, which is basically the whole ethos of blockchain is trust and collaboration, right? And I think for sure China is taking a leading role, as we discussed through this session, in both pushing enterprise adoption of blockchain, pushing the digital currency, pushing the future of digital assets in a regulated way. I think that is true. But I would like to frame it as more of a catalyst, right? Meaning China's taking that sort of initial pioneering position to adopt this at first, but really the world moves on trade and collaboration. It's not just sort of a siloed walled garden, right? And so blockchain becomes that enabling infrastructure to allow different walled gardens to talk to each other and thrive. So I view it as a catalyst moment. Again, referencing the digital currency where, if China had not come front and center and become the first to issue their digital currencies, then I don't think the rest of the world would have followed suit as fast. But now, if you look at the BIS, 80% of central banks are talking about digital currencies in a very serious way now, and that, I think, is driven by the catalyst moment of China taking a pioneering position in that. So likewise, with enterprise adoption, I think we talked about how there seems to be a difference in terms of the mindset of how blockchain will start to be adopted by the mainstream in, say, the West and in China. But because China, again, is taking a leadership position in doing that, that's going to drive global adoption of enterprise blockchain. And I think that's for the benefit of humanity overall.
I'm going to have to push you a little bit, guys, because Matthew gave us a weakness in China's blockchain ecosystem. So could you name one weakness, Harriet and Michael, in China's blockchain ecosystem?
No.
Okay. Yeah. If like one weakness, I think need more people to work on the foundational technology. I think China has been doing a lot on the application layer and the knowledge and also the business requirement from that layer. I think like we need more researchers to work on that layer to make greater impacts to the global ecosystem.
What about you, Michael?
All right, well, I would say that, look, the whole ethos of blockchain is this word decentralization, the power of decentralization, the power of consensus, of permissionless blockchains. The current ecosystem in China is focused more on the permission stuff than that decentralized story, okay? But I kind of view that decentralization, once it gets hold, things just become more decentralized. And so actually at our university, we were researching this. How can we create the proper hybrid frameworks, right, where you have enough control so the institutional powers that be, whether it's the government, whether it's a bank, these guys have to worry about compliance and money laundering and terrorism and a lot of things. They can't just, let things go free all the way to the extreme, right? Because that's completely a loss of control. And so there is a balance point that needs to be had in taking a centralized system and slowly decentralizing over time. And certainly I believe that in China that will happen, but it's more toward the centralized state right now. So I think that the willingness to open up to decentralization over time will be for the benefit of China. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's certainly a very exciting industry to be reporting on. Any questions from the audience? Oh, yes.
So when we're speaking of China being the superpower of blockchain, obviously U.S. doesn't like the idea. So in terms of U.S. position, as we don't see a lot of leadership that's been taken by the U.S. right now, but I think in the future when they are awakened, and then there could be any possibility that they are trying to stop or they're trying to slow down the development as what they are trying to do with the semiconductor industry. So I want to ask three of you that what do you think U.S. is going to do and what effects could we see from U.S. if they're trying to stop China from developing the blockchain technology?
I don't think I disagree with that framing, and here's why. I think most of blockchain is open source. It's not really possible to throw up bottlenecks in that way, but I would frame it differently. I think that something super interesting is that we're seeing the innovator's dilemma played out on a nation-state's scale. So the U.S. is the incumbent. I think it is fair to say that Wall Street is still the epicenter of the financial of the financial world, and we still have USD dollar hegemony, et cetera, et cetera. So the US plays the role of the innovator and is spending most of its time protecting its flank, protecting its Wall Street profit center, et cetera, et cetera. And I think as a result, they are having a hard time being at the forefront in terms of central bank digital currencies, in terms of incubating this nascent industry and things like that. So I would reframe your question in that way.
So I would say that in general there is geopolitically this sort of tech Cold War that's happening, right? And it's a zero-sum game thinking. We all know this in many forms, the Thucydides trap, right? This is when the incumbent superpower is now having a challenger, and then so now we have to actually bifurcate and do all these things, right? I would argue that, also following along what was said before, that blockchain is a little bit of a different beast, right? Because it's not like it's sort of like Huawei technology. You can choose to use the China technology or not. In the case of blockchain, blockchain is again about multi-party coordination, having stakeholders be able to coordinate in a trusted and secure way, right? Where trust doesn't exist between the parties beforehand. So in many ways, blockchain actually could be the unifying infrastructure and technology that brings people or countries of different mindsets together, right? And I think it's very hard, for example, to attack interoperability, right? Which is what things like the BSN is about. The interoperability between networks. You can keep your network, I'll keep mine, but at some point there's going to be a benefit to share data or value or digital assets in between. And so I think outside of the initial knee-jerk reaction, once we can demonstrate win-win models, right? And you can do things like the technology like smart contracts can enforce good behavior, right? Because now it's not like you can renege on a deal in your escrow or whatever. The smart contract locks the conditions, and so it sets a more unbiased, transparent, and fair ecosystem and enforces good behavior. And I think I'm also very interested in the game theoreticals of this. How can we create win-win scenarios in, say, business models to allow that to happen? I work with the UN quite a bit, and we're talking about what we call public-private partnerships to build infrastructure in the developing world, right? So instead of having China take over Belt and Road, like this zero-sum game style, right? And the U.S. gets nothing. How about we use blockchain systems to build a digital economy infrastructure in developing worlds, but have Western investment banks with Chinese investment and money to build that digital infrastructure for the developing world. That's the kind of vision I think is truly enabled by blockchain, and I think we can get to a better place with that.
Okay, guys, I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. It's been a great conversation, and I'm very fortunate to be reporting on this booming industry right now. I would like to invite Daniel Kohler, who is the moderator of our next panel on electric vehicles, and remind everyone that we have a workshop at M4 by coding school Le Wagon. And they're going to be telling you whether your job will exist in 2021. So, it's going to be a tough one. Thank you so much.